Are allegations of ethnic cleansing and war crimes in Ethiopia being ignored? Rights groups accuse security forces of atrocities in the Tigray region. Ethiopian government leaders say the allegations could fuel racial hatred. So what should the response be? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Mass killings, rape, torture, people deprived of food and forcibly transferred. They're some of the most serious allegations from almost 18 months of war in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch say evidence of ethnic cleansing and war crimes is being ignored internationally. Their joint report focuses on the western Tigray zone. It accuses officials and security forces from the neighboring Amhara region of a coordinated campaign against Tigrayan people. Fighting since late 2020 has so far killed thousands of people and forced many more to seek refuge in neighboring Sudan and Eritrea. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are calling for the deployment of peacekeepers led by the African Union to protect civilians and accuse the Ethiopian government of blocking aid workers and investigators from the war zone.
We have documented extrajudicial executions, arbitrary and other unlawful killings, forced expulsions, torture and other forms of ill treatment, rape and sexual violence, destruction and looting of property, and mass arbitrary arrests that amount to crimes against humanity and war crimes.
Ethiopia's government is pledging to make the guilty accountable, but says what it calls the report's ethnic undertones could fuel hatred, and that the report's recommendations aren't helpful to peace efforts. The Amhara regional government is dismissing the war crimes allegations as lies. Let's remind you of the main events in this conflict so far. Fighting began in November 2020 when Ethiopia's prime minister ordered a military offensive against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Abiy Ahmed said he was responding to attacks on army bases. Following months of fighting, Tigrayan fighters recaptured the regional capital Mekelle in June. By July, the TPLF entered the neighboring Amhara and Afar regions to the south. In October, the government launched a ground offensive to repel the rebels. They responded by recapturing the city of Lalibela. Thousands have been killed and more than 2 million people forced from their homes. Ethiopia's government declared a unilateral truce last month to allow much-needed aid to be delivered to Tigray.
With regards to the situation in Ethiopia, Tigray in particular, of course, we can only be pleased about the truth that has been announced, and we have managed over the weekend for the first time in many months to bring a convoy with 200 metric tons of humanitarian assistance by road into Tigray with food, with especially medical supplies, but also non-food items.
All right, let's bring in our guests from Ethiopia. We're joined by Fitz-Gerald. She's the director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Canada and has worked in Ethiopia for more than 20 years on issues concerning conflict security and governance. In Kenya's capital, Nairobi, Laetitia Bader, Horn of Africa director with Human Rights Watch and a contributor to the report. In Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, Gebrekirstos Gebreselassie, a writer and researcher and the founder and editor of Tigat.com. That's a website documenting the war in Tigray. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today. Laetitia, let me start with you today. These are very disturbing allegations that are outlined in this report from your group, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Could you please detail some of the other major findings in this report for our audience?
Well, basically, this is based on over a year of research, which started at the outbreak of the conflict, speaking to refugees who were fleeing from Western Tigray in November and December 2020. And what we find, and we document in this report, are waves of very serious crime against the Tigrayan population in Western Tigray. In the first phase, between November and December 2020, we document primarily war crimes by Ethiopian federal government forces alongside Amhara special forces and militia during the initial offensive in this region. And then from December 2020 onwards, we document waves of what we have described and found to be a campaign, an organized campaign of ethnic cleansing. And as part of that campaign, we document a whole range of very serious abuses: extrajudicial killings, sexual violence, mass incarceration in horrific detention conditions, and then the forced expulsions of hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans from this area that had been their home.
And from your perspective, have you had a chance to read the report, and what do you think about its findings?
I think the objective of the report is very sound: to investigate something that reflects gross human rights violations and atrocities. That said, I guess I'm wearing my research hat, and I would ask some questions that are methodological in nature. So the researchers did not go to the area where the evidence existed in the Wolkite region itself. Secondly, there were over 400, in fact, I think 427 interviews orchestrated, and that's a very good number. However, on close examination of the footnotes, it seems that the evidence that lent to the analysis was heavily weighted to the interviews undertaken by the researchers when they were on the ground in Sudan. And of course, we know that the groups in Sudan at the time not only included ethnic Tigrayan groups that were unfortunately and tragically displaced from Tigray proper, but also the Samri youth arm of the TPLF fighters, which reports suggest orchestrated the killings in my cadre, deaths which the number continues to grow, but number over 1,200. So that was the first methodological question I had. There were telephone calls that were made to ethnic Amhara from the region of Wolkite, but these were small in number, and we don't get a sense of number, and we don't see that reflected so much in the report. I think the other thing is that there's a big study by Gondar University on this very issue, which has been ongoing for over a year, and research principles command a literature review at the front end, anybody who's an expert on these issues. And it's just strange that there's no reference to that report. And the publication of this report has been unleashed 2 days before the planned publication and launch of the Gondar University report on those mass graves. I guess the last thing I'll say is that the content to me does not lend to the findings. To draw such huge conclusions that that accuse others of war crimes and ethnic cleansing needs a very deep investigation and a methodologically sound and robust investigation. So I do feel that there's a slightly weak link between the content of the report and the findings.
Laetitia, Anne seems to have some misgivings with the methodology. Would you like to respond to what she was saying?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. I mean, first of all, as we describe very clearly in the methodology, our research was ongoing until January 2022. In the course of that, a lot of what we document, I mean, the waves of abuses which happened from December 2020 onwards were at a time where the federal government forces and the Amhara militia were actually preventing people from fleeing into Sudan. So a lot of the research which was done in Sudan was on the early phases of the conflict, including a very detailed descriptions also of what happened in Maikadra. But a lot of the subsequent research was actually done with individuals who were forcibly expulsed as part of really this organized campaign of ethnic cleansing, which started from December 2020 onwards. And I mean, also we have corroborated a lot of our testimonial findings with satellite imagery, including of the destructions of entire villages, as well as the movement of these organized convoys. Here we're talking about individuals who were in detention facilities, who were being taken from detention facilities and bussed across into to the Tigrai River area, which is seen as the natural boundary between these two parts of Tigray. But we're also talking about people who were coerced into leaving. They'd been living in a context of abuses, of fear, of increasing discrimination against Tigrayans. We have a lot of detail in here in terms of what little humanitarian assistance was going into this area. This was an area where the Ethiopian government was in control of giving out assistance, was instrumentalized, and that was used as one of the tools by discriminatory preventing Tigrayans from having access to that, making the context in which they were living in almost impossible to survive in. So I think we can go on methodology for a long time. I mean, Ethiopia is a country where Human Rights Watch, at least for decades, has been doing remote research in. This is a context we are very used to operating in this type of context.
Gebrekirstos, have you read the full report? And if so, do you believe that it gives the full, most comprehensive picture of what's going on the ground, or do you think that there's more that needs to be reported?
Thank you. Yes, I did. And I'm happy that this report has started to scratch the surface of the crimes committed in Tigray. But it does have also a lot of limitations, some of it imposed by the government deliberately. It didn't allow. Like Anne was saying now, that they didn't go there. Well, the reason they didn't go there is because the government has a policy of total blockade and communications blackout to make sure that no voice comes out of Tigray. But it has also this problem of sticking to previous amnesty report, which was really a dangerous report that victimizes the very victims of Tigrayans as perpetrators of crimes. Even if, the Ethiopian and their allies were on the 9th of November in Maikadra, we've written a lot about this, but the report still sticks that, because it wants to stick to the previous amnesty report, that they entered Maikadra on the 9th, and the Tigrayans were involved in some conflict before. The truth is that the Ethiopian government orchestrated this crime, used amnesty to propagate this narrative that the Tigrayans were committing crimes, and it uses that report to galvanize Ethiopians against Tigrayans. Now, another thing that this report misses is the bigger context. So really, what is happening here is that Tigray, as a result of its history and its place in Ethiopia and in Ethiopia, Eritrea history, is being wiped out as a policy of both governments. In fact, 3 governments, if you consider the Amhara as some kind of independent actor. So what are they trying to do is they are trying to not only eliminate Tigray as a region, as a state, but also they are trying to either totally eliminate the Tigrayan people or reduce them, according to their words, to about 1 million people that don't pose any threat to both Ethiopia and Eritrea. And this is, I think, the bigger policy that the report misses.
Gebrekirstos, I just want to follow up with you about something. The Ethiopian government declared that there was an indefinite humanitarian truce. They declared that in late March. Is that actually holding? Is aid actually getting into Tigray right now?
No, aid is not getting into Tigray. They only let about 21 trucks only to reset the narrative. That is to kind of like, they got the news, they got the image that aid is getting into Tigray. We are now more than 2 weeks since they announced that. They only allowed 1 day 21 trucks, while we know that about 100 trucks are supposed to enter Tigray every day. So they have got the image, they have got the narrative in the international media that the aid is getting into Tigray. But the policy is, like I said before, reducing the Tigrayan population through starvation, massacres, ethnic cleansing, and it is working every second, every minute, every hour, and they are succeeding in this.
And I want to talk a little bit about the political picture in Ethiopia right now, how complicated things are, and also what actually has to happen for this conflict to come to an end.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, first of all, that forensic criminal evidence is required for this investigation into the mass graves. And that's the sort of thing that needs to be done to find conclusions and recommendations of the sort that the report has put forward. And that has yet to be done and is desperately needed. Secondly, in line with your question, I've just spent considerable time across the northern regions of Ethiopia. I have witnessed the huge levels of destruction and damage caused by the fighting left by the Tigrayan fighters. I have witnessed numerous mass graves. So the mass graves in Walkite are certainly not the only mass grave, and an investigation is going to happen on mass graves. It should be comprehensive. And thirdly, there are considerable numbers of Tigrayan fighters still occupying 5 regions in northern Afar. For any humanitarian truce to be successful, those troops have to pull back. There are many of them, and triangulated research across hundreds that were interviewed from these communities suggests numbers from 80,000 to 100,000 and the use of artillery and heavy weapons. There is no scope for a humanitarian truce or aid delivery in those circumstances. Secondly, this war is not only affecting Tigray, it is affecting 3 regions. I visited IDP camps that are starving of food and water at the moment, while the trucks that my fellow panelists referred to go past and go up to the region. There's great pressure for that aid to get to Tigray, and that is terribly important. The Tigrayans who I interviewed, who have come to the IDP camps across the border, have not had food for a long time. But there are 3 communities here affected by the conflict, 3 regional states. And I would summarize by saying that until the military activity is drawn to a conclusion and troops are drawn back, there can be no humanitarian solution, because humanitarian goals are incompatible with military insurgency goals. And there are a vast number of troops still across the 5 regions of Afar. So we are seeing, it seems, one side honor its commitment to a humanitarian truce at the moment, but not the other party to the conflict.
Laetitia, Ethiopia's government is pledging to make the guilty accountable. Are you getting indications after the publication of the report? Are you getting indications from government officials that that is actually going to happen?
Well, I mean, maybe to follow up on one of the points Anne made, which I would say I would agree with, one of the big recommendations in this report is the need for ongoing international independent investigations. And as part of that, there needs to be forensic expertise. One of the concerns we have with how long getting international investigations up and running into the abuses in the whole of northern Ethiopia is that we have documented documented incidents of destruction of physical evidence. And there is an expertise which is required for the retrieval of bodies, including ensuring that this is done in a way which is dignified as well. So we absolutely agree, and we have actually continued to call, we advocated for a new commission at the level of the Human Rights Council in Geneva to really look into this and to collect evidence, preserve evidence in a humane, dignified manner for future accountability. I also just want to come to the question of the humanitarian truce. I mean, under international humanitarian law, there does not need to be a truce for warring parties to allow unhindered humanitarian access. And I think it is important to continue to underline that what we have been seeing in Tigray in particular, and the ongoing obstruction of humanitarian assistance going in as a result of federal government policies and actions, but also regional authorities, security forces, etc. This constitutes, an effective siege and is a violation in itself. And I think it's important to continue to underline that humanitarian access cannot be used as a political tool. It should not be used as a consensus-building measure. It is a responsibility of all the warring parties to allow that going in. In terms of commitments to investigations, I mean, we have in our report looked into what we have heard so far. I mean, one of the big concerns with Western Tigray is this is in many ways the elephant in the room. It is very contested. It is very complicated. But we've also heard very early on, at the height of the beginning of the ethnic cleansing campaign, denials from the federal government and the regional authorities in the Amhara region. And so, it is positive to hear the government is going to look into our findings, but it is absolutely key that we continue to see, and we see the opening up of a space for credible international and regional investigations into what has been happening as well.
Gebrekirstos, from your perspective, why hasn't more action been taken by the international community?
Thank you. I just want to respond to some of the points. The Ethiopian government is the main engineer of this genocide. It has a policy on how to implement this. I'm not making up this. They even have told the European envoy, Pekka Haavisto, about their plan to wipe the Tigrayans, I'm quoting what they say to him, to wipe the Tigrayans for 100 years, to destroy them for 100 years. And this is to what they say to him. What we hear in the Amharic language every day is just how to eliminate the Tigrayans. This is an open discussion. How to wipe them out. This is just everyone talks. The Amhara authorities talk openly on media. So really, what we are talking here, I don't know why we beautify things, This is a policy of genocide, and it is everything that happens, the aid, the blockade, is all part of the plan to completely wipe out the Tigrayans in the long term. So Anne was talking previously, about the Tigrayans coming out of Tigray. That is also the policy, to first lay siege to them and then to disperse them. And this has been tried, by the way, in 1984 by the communist government. Now it's at a larger scale. So we don't miss that big picture. So how do you expect the Ethiopian government to, why do you recommend to the Ethiopian government to act? It is the very entity, the very engineer of this genocide. So that's one thing. The other reason why the international community is not acting, unfortunately, Tigray doesn't have a lot of global interest. And sadly, it has been allowed to die, while at the same time, once in a while saying some words like, they are concerned. But effectively, they know that this is a genocide. The US knew about this long time ago, about the Western Tigray ethnic cleansing, for example, but there is no action. In fact, today, they are signing memorandum of understanding with European companies, UN. It's all business as usual, because Tigray is not even producing refugees to be seen. The siege, the blockade, the communications blackout have shielded the from seeing what is happening in Tigray.
Gebrekirstos, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're just about out of time. I want to ask Anne one last question here. Anne, we just have about a minute left. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch are both calling for the deployment of peacekeepers led by the African Union to protect civilians. Is that something you think might happen?
I don't know. The deployment of peacekeepers would require agreement on all sides. That's a fundamental principle of international peacekeeping. I do think that what we are seeing now is a combination of conventional conflict and insurgency conflict still. Insurgency shaped by a serious information campaign with misinformation and disinformation. And what I would recommend is not peacekeepers, so long as both sides respect a humanitarian truce and the TPLF fighters withdraw from afar. But I think some verification and monitoring is desperately required. So an independent verification and monitoring force would be AU-led. This is an African issue. This is for the African continent to support and resolve. But I think something that verifies information, misinformation is vital.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Anne Fitz-Gerald, Laetitia Bader, and Gebrekirstos Gebreselassie. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.